Good evening. Since I was last with you, we have seen rioting and violence on an horrendous level. The Prime Minister seeks to blame it all purely on the far right. And yes, of course, there are far-right thugs. And
Nigel Farage, a prominent British political figure and former leader of the UK Independence Party, UKIP, has once again made headlines by speaking out on a highly contentious issue, the recent anti-immigration riots in the UK. These riots, which have shaken various towns and cities across the country, represent a disturbing and volatile chapter in the ongoing debate about immigration in the UK. Farage's commentary on these events has been as polarizing as it has been provocative, with his statements exposing deep divisions within British society about immigration, identity, and the future of the nation. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The anti-immigration riots that have recently erupted across the UK did not emerge in a vacuum.
a pretty appalling couple of days. Violence on the streets of this country that we haven't seen for a very long time. Yes, we had the riots in 2011, which were exercises in mass looting, but this is very, very different. Let's be clear. Thugs setting fire to hotels, migrant hotels with people in them, is just wrong at every level. I understand the frustrations. I understand the anger.
These riots are the culmination of years of growing tension and resentment, fueled by economic uncertainty, social fragmentation, and a sense of disenfranchisement among certain segments of the population. The riots have been characterized by violent clashes between protesters and police, the vandalism of property, and the expression of vehemently anti-immigrant sentiments. The epicenters of these disturbances are often in areas that have seen significant demographic changes due to immigration, leading to friction between different communities.
Slashing tyres, making people from Sky News and LBC flee the scene. We even saw a pub that was surrounded and intimidated. So there's fault on all sides. Street violence is never, ever right. I've spent 30 years fighting elections, some successful, some unsuccessful, because I believe in solving problems via the ballot box. Personally,
Nigel Farage, known for his sharp rhetoric and ability to tap into the concerns of many disaffected Britons, has argued that the riots are a predictable outcome of the UK's immigration policies. He contends that the government has failed to adequately address the challenges posed by mass immigration, particularly in terms of social cohesion and public services. Farage suggests that the riots are not merely a reaction to immigration itself, but are also a response to what many perceive as the government's inability to control the borders and manage the influx of immigrants effectively.
We live in very dangerous times, it seems, right now, and I want to start by saying that, you have been the subject of an awful lot of accusations over the course of the last sort of several days, and I suppose since a week ago Monday. I mean, you've been accused of starting riots, you've been accused of encouraging riots. And your own safety is at stake in this as well, right?
some of what's been said is
Farage's narrative hinges on the idea that the UK's immigration policies have been too lenient, and that this has led to a situation where large numbers of immigrants have entered the country without proper integration into British society. He argues that this lack of integration has fostered a sense of alienation and hostility among native Britons, particularly in working-class communities that have borne the brunt of immigration. Farage points to the strain on public services, such as the National Health Service, NHS.
I fought elections because I believe that democracy is the peaceful way to solve problems. And as for the Tommy Robinsons and those that genuinely do stir up hatred, well, I've never had anything to do with them. In fact, I was the one person above all that got rid of the BNP as an electoral threat. So as for what is being said,
Schools and housing, as evidence that the government has not adequately prepared for the consequences of mass immigration. Moreover, Farage has highlighted the cultural impact of immigration, suggesting that the arrival of large numbers of immigrants from different cultural backgrounds has led to the erosion of traditional British values and social norms. This, he argues, has created a sense of cultural dislocation among many Britons, who feel that their way of life is being threatened. Farage's comments on this aspect of immigration have been particularly controversial.
personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy MacDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC, calling these Farage's riots. People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement,
with critics accusing him of stoking xenophobia and inflaming tensions for political gain. However, Farage's supporters argue that he is merely voicing concerns that many ordinary Britons feel but are afraid to express due to fears of being labeled as racist or xenophobic. They believe that Farage is providing a necessary counter-narrative to what they see as a politically correct consensus that refuses to acknowledge the negative aspects of immigration.
Because I believe in the democratic process.
Right.
I've never, in any point in those 30 years, been involved in violence, been involved in street protest, been involved in encouraging any of these things. What I did sense after those horrific murders was we weren't being told anything.
Yes.
We had a lot of, and I saw it as you did, he'd arrived on a boat across the channel last October.
For these supporters, Farage's willingness to speak out on these issues, even at the risk of being criticized, is seen as a sign of his commitment to the British people. One of the key points Farage makes is that the government's approach to immigration has been fundamentally flawed because it has failed to take into account the capacity of communities to absorb large numbers of newcomers. He argues that the pace of immigration has been too rapid.
But nothing could be further from the truth. We've even got national broadcasters like James O'Brien calling them the Farage riots. This is unfair, untrue, and actually it's directly inciting violence against me. Indeed, over the weekend I've had to have a massive uplift in personal security, and that's been advised by government agencies. So all this peace and love that we hear from those on the left simply isn't true.
And that this has overwhelmed local services and infrastructure. Farage has called for a more controlled and selective immigration policy, one that prioritizes the needs of the UK and ensures that immigrants are able to integrate into British society. In his analysis of the riots
of the weekend. But I guess there are some who are frightened that politically one day I could benefit from what is going on. Well, that's not what interests me. What interests me is not just ending these riots and not just quelling them for now. I don't want to live in France, where these divisions occur once every few months, where parts of big French cities effectively almost become no-go zones. I want to find long-term.
Farage has also pointed to the role of the media and political elites in shaping public perceptions of immigration. He accuses these groups of downplaying the challenges associated with immigration and of promoting a narrative that ignores the concerns of ordinary Britons. According to Farage, the media has been complicit in creating a climate where legitimate concerns about immigration are dismissed as bigotry, leading to a sense of frustration and powerlessness among many people. This, he argues,
On a watch list, yes or no. Remember the London Bridge attacks?
Yes.
Within an hour of the attack, we knew the man had been on a watch list. Right? One of the reasons the Southport riots were as bad as they were, one of the reasons the mosque itself was targeted, is because the authorities didn't tell us quickly enough what the truth was.
Right.
Now, we then learned a few hours later he was born in Cardiff, and that actually he wasn't a radical Islamist at all.
Has contributed to the anger that has manifested in the form of riots. Farage's commentary on the riots has also touched on the issue of law and order. He has criticized the government's response to the riots, suggesting that it has been too lenient, and that this has emboldened those who engage in violent protests. Farage has called for a tougher stance on lawbreakers, arguing that the rule of law must be upheld if the UK is to maintain social stability.
In just a moment, but right or not, there is a widespread perception of two-tier policing. I believe it began at the time of the Black Lives Matters protests. You know, we saw people literally tearing down statues and chucking them in the dock and nobody actually being stopped from doing it. We saw Churchill's statue defaced. We saw the cenotaph defiled and police officers taking a knee in the street, supporting.
He has also linked the riots to broader issues of crime and disorder, suggesting that uncontrolled immigration has contributed to a breakdown in social order in some areas. While Farage's views on immigration and the riots have been welcomed by some, they have also been met with fierce opposition. Critics argue that Farage is oversimplifying a complex issue and that his rhetoric risks exacerbating divisions within British society. They contend that the riots are not simply a reaction to immigration, but are also the result of deeper social and economic issues, such as poverty, inequality, and a lack of opportunities.
The actions of the far right is to misunderstand two things. Firstly, let's be clear, there were masked Muslim extremist mobs, some with weapons, going around the streets of Midlands and northern cities, threatening journalists. Journalists literally running away. Indeed, in some cases, people even having their tyres on their cars slashed. So, of course,
these critics argue that Farage's focus on immigration as the root cause of the riots is misguided, and that a more nuanced approach is needed to address the underlying problems. In response to Farage's comments, some have pointed out that immigration has brought many benefits to the UK, including economic growth, cultural diversity, and a more dynamic society. They argue that the challenges associated with immigration, such as pressure on public services, can be managed through better planning and investment, rather than through restricting immigration. These critics also warn that Farage's rhetoric risks alienating immigrant communities and could lead to increased tension and division.
Over the course of the weekend, my security situation has radically changed.
Yes. And isn't it libelous, apart from anything else, some of this stuff?
Well, I've been looking at this. Libel, yeah, you have to prove actual harm, actual reputational harm.
Right.
I've fought libel before, actions. I've even fought one against the Times newspaper. I don't know whether you've ever fought one, Mike, but if you do...
Yeah, I have.
The debate over the anti-immigration riots and Farage's commentary on them also raises broader questions about the future of the UK in a post-Brexit world. Farage has long been a leading figure in the campaign to leave the European Union, and his views on immigration are closely linked to his vision of a sovereign, independent Britain. The riots in this context can be seen as part of the ongoing struggle to define what kind of country the UK will be in the future. For Farage and his supporters, controlling immigration is a key part of that vision, while for others, a more inclusive and open approach is needed. One of the most contentious aspects of Farage's argument is his suggestion that the UK is losing its identity due to immigration.
Compared to the way the riots in Southport were handled, were very, very different. None of this, folks, is aimed at all at the men or women on the front line, and frankly, it is truly appalling how many police officers have been hurt over the course of the last few days. Do we have two-tier policing? Are we led by two-tier care? That's our debate to begin this evening. I'm joined by former Detective Chief Inspector in the Met Police.
Farage has often spoken about the need to protect British culture and values, and he sees immigration as a threat to that identity. This view resonates with many who feel that their communities have changed beyond recognition in recent years. However, it also provokes strong reactions from those who believe that the UK has always been a diverse and multicultural society, and that immigration enriches the country rather than diminishes it. Farage's critics also argue that his focus on immigration as the cause of social problems is a form of scapegoating. They contend that by blaming immigrants for issues such as crime, unemployment, and pressure on public services, Farage is diverting attention from other factors, such as government austerity policies.
the extremes of both. What Starmer doesn't understand, and when he says, I'm going to stop the far right, what he doesn't understand is the general feeling of dissatisfaction that has been out there in this country growing for years. I talked in the general election about societal breakdown. What I meant by that were communities being split apart.
Economic inequality and social neglect. These critics argue that the riots are a symptom of broader systemic issues that cannot be solved by simply reducing immigration. The role of populism in Farage's rhetoric is also a point of contention. Farage has been accused of using populist tactics to appeal to people's fears and prejudices, rather than engaging in a constructive debate about the challenges facing the UK. His critics argue that this approach is divisive and dangerous, particularly in a country that is already deeply polarized over issues such as Brexit and national identity. They warn that Farage's rhetoric could further inflame tensions and lead to more unrest.
Because we've got this terribly polarised world now, haven't we? We've got two-tier society minimum, we've got two-tier policing, we've got two-tier politics, we've got two-tier pretty much everything, two-tier justice. I mean, I'm going to play you from last night, the Walthamstow rally, because, of course, it's all kumbaya this morning. Everybody's going, oh, isn't it lovely? You know, hate has been beaten by hope.
Yes,
but let's have a look at what they were chanting.
Despite the controversy surrounding his views, Farage remains a significant figure in British politics, and his commentary on the anti-immigration riots has certainly sparked debate. His ability to tap into the concerns of a significant portion of the population, particularly those who feel left behind by globalization and multiculturalism, means that his voice cannot be easily dismissed. Whether one agrees with him or not, Farage's analysis of the riots and their causes raises important questions about the direction the UK is heading in and how it will navigate the challenges of the future. Nigel Farage's take on the anti-immigration riots also forces us to confront the broader socio-political implications of the unrest.
Black Lives Matter. Remember? Churchill's statue being defaced. The cenotaph being abused in central London. And the police response? They knelt down in the street and took the knee to a Marxist organisation that wants to bring down Western civilization. And it goes on and on from there. Compare the policing to the riots in Leeds.
The turmoil that has gripped parts of the UK is not just about immigration. It's about a nation grappling with its identity, its values, and its future in an increasingly globalized world. Farage, often seen as a spokesperson for a significant segment of the British public, has tapped into the frustrations of many who feel that their voices are being ignored by the political and media elites. The riots, in this context, are a manifestation of a deeper crisis of confidence in the institutions that have traditionally governed British society. One of the critical issues Farage has highlighted is the perceived disconnect between the governing elites and the ordinary people. Farage argues that the political class, particularly those in Westminster, has become out of touch with the realities faced by many Britons, especially those in economically disadvantaged areas.
You know, in what world is that anything to do with what's going on?
Well, first things first, the violence has been abhorrent.
Yes.
And should be condemned in every way. All right? And we've seen violence on both sides, but let's be frank, more thuggery from young white youths than from Muslim gangs. Let's be absolutely frank about what's happened over the course of the last few days. However, policed very differently is the first point to make. Second point to make is,
according to Farage, these politicians, shielded by their metropolitan bubbles, have failed to understand the impact of immigration on communities that are already struggling with poverty, unemployment, and a lack of resources. The riots, he suggests, are a result of this disconnect, a cry for help from people who feel they have been abandoned by those in power. Farage's critique extends beyond the political elite to include the media, which he accuses of being complicit in perpetuating a narrative that minimizes the challenges associated with immigration. He claims that the mainstream media has consistently downplayed or ignored the concerns of ordinary Britons, instead promoting a pro-immigration agenda that glosses over the negative consequences. Farage argues that this has created a climate of censorship where legitimate concerns about immigration are stifled or dismissed as bigotry. In his view, this has contributed to a growing sense of frustration and resentment among the public.
Of the last few weeks, I'm talking about the direction of policing. Is it any wonder that the boss of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, brushed away a microphone yesterday when he was asked about two-tier policing? Priti Patel, you're wrong on this. Keir Starmer, you're wrong on this. Most of us think that ethnic minority groups are policed entirely differently to that of white British people. Folks,
which has now boiled over into violent protests. This criticism of the media is not new for Farage. Throughout his political career, he has positioned himself as an outsider, challenging what he sees as the dominance of politically correct narratives that ignore the realities faced by many Britons. His supporters see him as a champion of free speech and a defender of the right to express concerns about immigration without fear of being labeled as racist. This framing has been particularly effective in rallying support among those who feel that their views are not being represented in the mainstream discourse. However,
Why we're in a perilous position is an increasing number of people are now losing complete faith in the democratic process. They email me every single day to say, what is the point? Now, none of what I'm about to say justifies the thuggery at all, but if you've been told in 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019...
Farage's approach has also been accused of being divisive. Critics argue that his rhetoric often blurs the line between legitimate concerns about immigration and outright xenophobia. They point out that by focusing so heavily on the negative aspects of immigration, Farage risks demonizing entire communities of immigrants who contribute positively to British society in many ways. These critics argue that Farage's rhetoric could exacerbate existing tensions and lead to further polarization within the country. The accusation that Farage's rhetoric is divisive is particularly significant in the context of the UK's recent history. The Brexit referendum, in which Farage played a key role.
And here's the important thing. Do we want to deal with the symptom that we're seeing today or solve the problem? Dealing with the symptom will turn us into France, where these flare-ups, these racial tensions between the Muslim community and the French right flare up month after month, year after year, leaving big parts of Marseille and Paris effectively no-go zones. Is that what we want?
Was one of the most divisive events in modern British history, splitting the country almost down the middle. The debate over Brexit brought issues of immigration and national identity to the forefront, and the divisions it created have yet to heal fully. Farage's comments on the anti-immigration riots can be seen as part of this ongoing struggle over what kind of country the UK wants to be: open and multicultural, or more insular and focused on protecting its traditional identity. Farage's views on immigration also reflect a broader populist trend that has gained traction in many Western countries in recent years. Like other populist leaders, Farage has capitalized on the anxieties and insecurities of people who feel left behind by globalization. These individuals often see immigration as a threat to their jobs, their culture, and their way of life.
Who think, well, we've been totally let down, what's the point? And that's my real concern. You know, as you say, it's Kumbaya morning, very well put, and all of it means that Sir Keir Starmer will do absolutely nothing. Nothing will change. Policing won't change. His narrative won't change. All that might slightly change is that Mr. Musk, an ex, might start to face a bit of regulation, potentially.
Farage's rhetoric speaks directly to these fears, offering a narrative in which the problems faced by the UK can be traced back to immigration and the failure of the political elite to manage it properly. The populist appeal of Farage's message lies in its simplicity and directness. By framing the riots as a consequence of failed immigration policies, Farage provides a clear and easily understandable explanation for the unrest. This contrasts sharply with the more complex and nuanced analyses offered by many in the political and academic establishment, who argue that the riots are the result of multiple factors, including economic inequality, social exclusion, and systemic racism. For Farage's supporters, his willingness to speak plainly and to name immigration as the central issue is refreshing and empowering.
Population increase has put massive pressure on people's lives. We need to deal with the young men, undocumented young males, crossing the English Channel. Just today we learn that the Labour government are going to close down the hotels, close down the RAF camps like Wethersfield and Scampton, close down, as we learned last week, the Bibby Stockholm. They're going to put all these people now.
However, this populist framing is not without its dangers. By reducing complex social phenomena to a single cause, Farage's rhetoric can oversimplify the issues and obscure other important factors. For example, while immigration may be a significant factor in the riots, it is unlikely to be the only one. Economic factors such as unemployment and austerity are also likely to play a role, as are broader issues of social cohesion and trust in institutions. By focusing so heavily on immigration, Farage's narrative risks neglecting these other important factors, making it harder to find comprehensive solutions to the problems facing the UK. Moreover, Farage's focus on immigration as the root cause of the riots can also have the effect of further entrenching divisions within society.
Even on things like stop and search, there is a perception that the police say, well, actually, there's a lot of black people in this area. If we do stop and search, they'll call us racist and horrible names. It has to be true to a certain extent that the police deal with different communities in different ways.
The perception is certainly there. Personally, I don't think there is two-tier policing. I think the police do their best.
By framing immigration as a threat, Farage's rhetoric can contribute to a climate of fear and mistrust, both among native Britons and among immigrant communities. This, in turn, can make it harder to build the kind of inclusive and cohesive society that is needed to address the underlying issues that contribute to unrest. Critics of Farage argue that what is needed is not more division, but more dialogue and understanding between different communities. Despite these criticisms, Farage's views on the anti-immigration riots resonate with a significant portion of the population. For many people, Farage's narrative speaks to their own experiences and concerns, and they see him as a rare politician who is willing to speak the truth as they see it. Farage's popularity, especially among those who feel marginalized by the political system, suggests that his message is tapping into a deep vein of discontent in British society. This discontent is not limited to concerns about immigration. It also reflects broader anxieties about the direction in which the country is heading. For many people, the UK is at a crossroads, facing significant challenges both at home and abroad. The Brexit vote was one expression of these anxieties, and the anti-immigration riots are another. In this context, Farage's call for a more controlled and selective approach to immigration is part of a broader vision for a post-Brexit Britain, one that is more in control of its borders, more focused on its national interests, and more protective of its traditional values.
They've now been put even further to the back of the queue. Do you think that is going to solve any of these tensions, any of these problems? I promise you that it won't. We have to be clear.
Farage's vision for the UK, however, is not universally shared. Many people in the UK, particularly younger generations, have a very different view of what the country should be. They see the UK as a diverse, multicultural society that benefits from immigration and is open to the world. For these individuals, Farage's rhetoric is outdated and reactionary, representing a Britain that is out of step with the modern world. This clash of visions is one of the central tensions in British society today, and it is likely to continue shaping the country's political landscape for years to come. One of the critical challenges facing the UK in the wake of the anti-immigration riots is how to reconcile these different visions for the country's future. Farage's comments on the riots have exposed the deep divisions that exist within British society, and addressing these divisions will require more than just changes to immigration policy. It will also require a broader effort to rebuild trust and cohesion within communities, to address the economic and social inequalities that contribute to unrest, and to find a way to move forward as a united country. In this context, the role of leadership becomes crucial. Farage's critics argue that his approach is not one of leadership but of demagoguery, appealing to base instincts and stoking fears for political gain. They argue that what the UK needs now is not more divisive rhetoric, but leaders who are willing to bring people together and to find common ground. This, they argue, is the only way to address the deep-seated issues that have led to the anti-immigration riots and to prevent similar unrest in the future. Farage, however, would likely counter that his approach is precisely what is needed to bring about real change. He would argue that by speaking out on issues that others are afraid to address, he is providing the kind of bold leadership that the country needs in a time of crisis. Farage's supporters would agree, seeing him as a voice for the voiceless and a champion of the people against an out-of-touch elite. The debate over Farage's comments on the anti-immigration riots is ultimately a debate about the kind of country the UK wants to be. It is a debate about whether the UK should be more open or more closed, more multicultural or more monocultural, more global or more nationalistic. These are questions that have no easy answers, and the path forward is likely to be fraught with challenges. What is clear, however, is that the issues raised by Farage's commentary, issues of immigration, identity, and national cohesion, will remain central to the UK's political discourse for the foreseeable future. As the UK grapples with these issues, it is also important to consider the international context. The anti-immigration riots and the debates they have sparked are not unique to the UK. Across Europe and beyond, many countries are facing similar challenges as they deal with the pressures of immigration, globalization, and cultural change. In this sense, the UK's experience can be seen as part of a broader global trend in which questions of identity, belonging, and sovereignty are becoming increasingly contested. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what impact will his expose have on UK immigration policy? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.